Welcome, everyone, to Congressman Chris Deluzio's Telephone Town Hall. Thank you for joining us. I'll be your moderator for this evening's event. It's scheduled to last about an hour. Now, as you may know, Congressman Deluzio is a veteran, voting rights attorney, cybersecurity expert, union organizer, and he proudly represents Pennsylvania's 17th Congressional District and all of you. Now, we'll get this event started in just a few minutes. This is a live, interactive event, and it's all about giving you, Congressman Deluzio's constituents, the chance to ask questions about the issues you care about. To submit your question anytime during this event, please press *3 on your telephone keypad. Now, if you're streaming this event online, you can type your question right below the streaming player. Now, we might not be able to get to all the questions this evening, but we will get to as many as we can. After pressing *3, you'll relay your question to a staff member. They'll record your name, hometown, and your question and put it in queue for your congressman. Again, submit your questions by pressing *3 to speak with a staff member and leave your question for Congressman Deluzio. Now, here's another quick welcome to everyone who's just now joined us as we're connecting to more and more constituents in the district. You're here at the start of Congressman Chris Deluzio's Telephone Town Hall. We'll begin our live event with the Congressman very soon. Along with asking questions this evening, you can subscribe to the Congressman's e-newsletter by simply pressing *6 on your telephone keypad. Again, to subscribe to the Congressman's e-newsletter, please press *6 to leave your email and get subscribed. We're very glad you've joined us for this live telephone town hall with Congressman Chris Deluzio. And for those just joining, if you want to ask a question of your congressman, which is the main goal of this event, please press *3 to submit your question. That's *3 on your telephone keypad if you have a question. Now, the technology we're using for this event allows us to get instant feedback from you. And Chris Deluzio has a poll question for all of you to help better understand who's joining us tonight. So please use your telephone keypad to answer the following question. Is this your first telephone town hall with Congressman Deluzio? If yes, press 1. If no, please press 2. I see a number of people are responding to that question. Thank you very much for participating. I'll share the results of that poll question in just a moment. So please keep submitting your Q&A by pressing *3 on your telephone keypad. And if you're streaming the event online at deluzio.house.gov/live, you can type your question right below the streaming player. Now, while it's not possible to get to everyone's question this evening, we'll get to as many as possible. So stay on the line to hear if your question is answered. If you don't have a question but want to listen in, you can listen to the audio stream of this event on Congressman Deluzio's Facebook page or at deluzio.house.gov/live. Again, that's deluzio.house.gov/live. But if you would like to ask a question of your congressman, you could do that by pressing *3 right now. And looking at the results from the poll question, thank you to everybody who took a moment to reply. 83% of those that responded say it's their first live telephone town hall with Congressman Deluzio. So welcome. And now I'd like to invite Congressman Chris Deluzio to give some opening remarks before we get to answering your questions. Congressman, the floor is yours, sir.
Well, thank you, and welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming on. My team tells me we've got, more than 6,500 people on the call. That's great. Thanks for joining me. Thanks for coming on tonight and spending some time with me and for me to hear from you. I hope you folks know a little bit about me. I'm so honored to serve as our congressman. I grew up in our district in Thornburg. I'm a proud husband and dad, veteran, did work as a lawyer to protect our democracy, and did some work with the steelworkers to fight for a union. But it is my great honor to represent us in Washington now in Congress. And we're here at the start of the new Congress, the start of a new administration. But what hasn't changed are my values. I'm a guy who thinks if you work hard, you play by the rules, the American dream ought to be in reach for everyone. I think those are pretty central values to who we are in Western Pennsylvania. We got to be focused as a country on making more stuff in America and in Western Pennsylvania, bringing down costs for people, growing and protecting jobs and industry right here at home. Too often, and I think we all probably know this, our government has not been working to restore the American dream or to guard our liberty and our freedom or to put people from places like Western Pennsylvania first. I have always said that I am ready to work with anyone where I can to get stuff done, good stuff done for the people who I'm so proud to represent, and people all over this country. And I'll give some examples of that. Rail safety. We are just 2 years past the derailment in East Palestine, and we are still fighting, as we should continue to fight hard to get something done on rail safety. Growing manufacturing jobs. I think there's opportunity there. We can hopefully get something out of Washington to reset our trade policy to make more stuff in America, to grow those solid jobs. I've also said, for as long as I've been doing this job, that I will always fight back to defend the people of Western Pennsylvania, our interests, from any actions that are going to hurt us. And I will always fight corruption. I will tell you, I think it's corrupt when our government is doing the bidding of robber barons and gutting public services that we all pay for. That's a big part, frankly, of what concerns me about Elon Musk and some of his recent actions in his group. My problem is not that he's a rich guy or that he's had success in his companies. That's not my problem. My problem is that this gentleman has huge ongoing conflicts of interest with his companies and investments in their massive federal contracts. That's a big conflict of interest when you're getting to direct actions in any administration. I am all about making our government work better and more efficient. We can find wasteful spending. Okay, let's dig it out. But one thing I've noticed, these folks in this administration talking about efficiency in government spending, they don't talk about the Pentagon. They don't talk about price gouging that I see in my work on the Armed Services Committee from defense contractors, who too often can't deliver materials and equipment that our troops need on time or on budget that we all pay for. I don't hear much from these folks raising the alarm about privatization at the VA, Veterans Affairs, that so many of my fellow veterans and I rely on, and yet those same privatization schemes are giving veterans too often worse care that we all pay too much for. I don't hear much about them digging into some of the bad Medicare Advantage plans that are rife with fraud that hurt our seniors who choose those Medicare Advantage programs. Those are real problems and differences, and frankly, opportunities where we can force our government to do better. Now, what I've seen coming out of this administration so far, a lot of folks who want to clear the way to pay for tax handouts for huge corporations and the ultra-rich. And it's that same myth of trickle-down economics that I've talked about a lot, plundering everyone else in our government to enrich those folks. It's not worked for us in Western Pennsylvania. We know our history. It's not worked for this country. And I've seen too much of it in the early days of the Trump administration. I'll give some examples. There was a freeze announced on all federal funding and grants, the infrastructure law, and more. Those freezes, which thankfully for now courts have blocked, could have defunded things like local law enforcement, road and bridge repairs, opioid treatment, you name it. Put at risk National Institutes of Health, or NIH funding, which is a huge part of funding so much research that saves lives and drives economic activity right here at home for us in Western Pennsylvania. That should and needs to fund research monitoring the long-term health impacts of the East Palestine derailment. I heard the president suggest he's going to send American troops to Gaza, and I'm sure we're going to have questions and I'll get to talk more about that, but I think that's crazy. There are reports of even thousands of new CIA workers who now may be at risk because their names were shared recklessly in an unclassified email that our adversaries would love to get their hands on. That's a national security failure, and it's amateur hour to put American lives at risk, to put our national security at risk in that way. Those are just a few examples, and I'm expressing to you my frustration of what I've seen. Now, I know I've heard from a lot of constituents, and my team has too. Thank you. There's nothing more American than making your voice heard, and you should do that. There's a page on my website where you can share your experiences, that something that may have happened to you or you've seen from some of these executive actions. So it can guide my work, and frankly, I can share the stories of folks from Western Pennsylvania when I'm down in Washington. But of course, tonight the goal is hear questions from all of you, and we'll try to take as many questions as we can. If we can't get to it, you can always call or email my office or leave us a message on the website. I just want to share one more update before I get to questions. A little while ago, before voting tonight, I had a briefing from the NTSB, that's the National Transportation Safety Board. They're the ones who investigate accidents like the tragic one outside the airport here in Washington, where too many lost their lives, both service members and then crew and passengers on the civilian commercial aircraft. It was a briefing for members of the Transportation Infrastructure Committee, where I serve, both Democrats and Republicans in the briefing. And while that investigation is ongoing, we expect a preliminary report in the next few weeks from the NTSB about exactly what happened, and hopefully then a fuller report on what we can do to make our air travel safer in this country. So I'll stop there. Thank you guys for being on. Look forward to getting into your questions.
Thank you, Congressman Deluzio. We will start the questions in just a moment, but before we get into it, a quick reminder, you can submit your question by pressing *3 on your telephone keypad. And along with asking questions, this evening you can also subscribe to the Congressman's weekly email newsletter by pressing *6. Everybody that's on the line with us, we're glad you've joined Congressman Chris Deluzio's live telephone town hall this evening. And our first question comes, we've got it from a number of people. It's been submitted by Nettie from Indianola, RR and Noreen, who are online. And the question is, Congressman, how on earth in the USA does a government volunteer, Elon Musk, with no security clearance, being allowed to control the livelihoods of thousands of people?
Well, thanks, everybody, for the question. And as you probably know, I think I said at the beginning, my office and I have heard a lot of versions of this question the last few days and in the prior weeks. You know, part of it is that President Trump decided to entrust Elon Musk to have this role. And as I said in my opening, my problem is not that Elon Musk is wealthy or that he has these businesses. Okay. My problem is that he has conflicts of interest that put at risk so much trust in our government, that he benefits through his companies and otherwise with big federal contracts and should not be in a position to be directing and advising federal policy. That's corruption to me. I've been calling on my Republican colleagues to work with us on legislation to tackle this, to fix this, to make it so that someone who's going to serve in the government, and we should have good, talented people serving our government. But we can't have people with conflicts of interest. We can't have corruption in our government. And we should require people to pass real vetting for security clearances to vet these conflicts of interest, and if they have to, get rid of those conflicts and sell their businesses and holdings and all the rest. And I've heard from constituents worried that Mr. Musk and this Doge group, have now put their privacy at risk. A veteran today worried about accessing systems around disability claims or veterans' health care. There's reports around the Social Security and Medicare systems that so many seniors' info and all of ours who pay taxes are a part of. Treasury Department systems, which are so central to the functioning of our government and the spending that gets authorized by the Congress. Department of Education data apparently is at risk. And again, the concerning part here is our privacy, what folks here in this group, this Doge group, might do with that access, whether they might try to disrupt payments, whether they might try to profit from all of this sensitive data. And again, I think it is a huge problem that Elon Musk has these conflicts of interest because of his businesses, because of his company's contracts with the federal government. That is the kind of plundering that I have no interest in, that we have to fight back on, that I want my Republican colleagues to join with us. We have a bill, I think today, the Taxpayer Data Protection Act, which is all about protecting the confidential records of Americans from exactly these kinds of violations. We need 3 House Republicans to join the Democrats in the House to pass this kind of bill, 3 of them. It's about following the rule of law. It's about taking on corruption. I know fixing this doesn't fix so much of what I think is a problem in Washington. I talk a lot about people trading stocks as members of Congress, which I think is unacceptable. But we have to follow the rule of law. We have to have public confidence. And when you see this kind of conflict of interest running around, putting at risk our privacy, putting business and personal interest ahead of the common good, ahead of our public interest, we should speak out. We should say it's unacceptable, and we should see pressure brought on those in power, the administration, and their allies in the Congress, to end it.
So, Congressman, our second question comes from Gary in Baldwin Township, who's saying, Congressman, what are you going to do to prevent the takeover of Gaza by President Trump? Is there anything we can do to prevent such a stupid idea?
Well, Gary, thank you. I will tell you, when I first sought this job, President Biden was in office, and I laid out exactly my standard for whether I would ever send Americans into harm's way. Remember, it is the Congress who votes whether we ever commit Americans to fight. My standard is a simple one. Can I look every constituent in the eye, every parent and grandparent, and say, you or your kid or your grandkid should go risk your life for the cause? And let me tell you, sending Americans to occupy Gaza does not meet that standard. I think it's a foolish, terrible idea. I cannot believe President Trump has proposed this. It is counter to any lessons that we have learned from the 20 years of war in the Middle East. I'm a veteran of the war in Iraq, so many of my generation served there or in Afghanistan or elsewhere. I would have hoped in this country we learned that sending Americans off to foolish wars was a mistake, and that American lives and the lives of those in the places that we would send them are precious. And this is foolish. He will not have support from me and people like me in the Congress. I know so many in the Democratic Party have spoken out against this. I heard some encouraging opposition from some in the Republican Party as well. I'd like to hear more of that because everyone knows this is a bad idea. This is not at a moment where there is a fragile ceasefire holding a peace, where there are still hostages who have to be returned. This imperils that. The swift response you saw from the Arab neighbors rejecting this idea out of hand, I think shows the risk of a lack of American leadership when we have to secure a peace, we have to get hostages home, and hopefully put the Israelis and Palestinians in a place to secure a longer-term peace. That has to be the goal.
So for everybody that's joined us on this evening's live telephone town hall with Congressman Chris Deluzio, you can take a second right now and get signed up to receive the Congressman's weekly e-newsletter. And you can do that by pressing *6 on your telephone keypad. Again, get enrolled in the Congressman's e-newsletter by pressing *6 on your telephone keypad. Let's get back to another question. This one comes from Enzo, who says, I have a family member who is a veteran with PTSD. Congressman Deluzio, what are you doing to support cannabis legislation, which helps with his condition?
Thanks for the question. And I think the veteran side of this exposes a problem in a big way. Folks think that some states have, and they have tried to legalize cannabis around medical use or recreational use, and yet it's still illegal under federal law. And we see this so often in the VA where veterans want to seek medical cannabis, and they can't within the VA because the federal government still treats this like some of the most serious drugs that are banned. I think that ought to change. I think our federal government should change the law around cannabis and marijuana. I think we've got to open up the states to have the real freedom to make their decisions about legalization. Certainly the fact that veterans can't get medical prescriptions within VA when there are physicians who want to do this, it doesn't make sense to me. There are bills I've supported around removing marijuana from that list of scheduled substances and eliminating some of those criminal penalties, and also around banking so that the banking can be there for businesses in the states where this has been approved and authorized but are running up against federal bans. And, to your question on veteran side of this, we know that my fellow veterans are much more likely to die by suicide. Mental health is a big part of that. And I think in this moment, to have our government blocking access to some of the tools that might help people, that's a mistake. I mean, even in the last Congress, there was some work in the Veterans Affairs Committee where I served for much of my first term around advancing alternative therapies around things like psychedelic-assisted therapy. And you had some Democrats, Republicans encouraging research at the VA and the NIH, that's the National Institutes for Health, whose funding is at risk because of those funding freeze executive orders and guidance I talked about earlier. This is not a time for us to be shutting down important research that can help people, not just veterans, people all over the country who might benefit from treatment. And we got to get the federal government to wake up about the potential benefits and, frankly, the freedom folks in states should have to make decisions around cannabis and marijuana.
The next question comes from Bill, who's a veteran himself in Moon Township. He's asking, Are veterans' benefits going to be cut?
Well, I certainly hope not. I'm not going to do anything that would ever lead to veterans' benefits being cut. But I will tell you, I am concerned. I'll tell you a couple things. When this federal freeze executive order and guidance first came out, they were telling agencies to include Veterans Affairs, the VA, to freeze hiring. I sent a letter off the VA Pittsburgh. I've gotten a response, and we're still working through some of that to make sure that they aren't unable to hire and that they can seek exemptions for some of the positions that aren't on the exempted list of the freeze. If you're getting lost and confused, it is confusing. It's kind of ridiculous. And I come back to this group, DOGE, which is the so-called government efficiency. And again, I am all about finding efficiency in government. We're not going to do that on the backs of veterans, certainly not with my support. And one of the proposals that came out of DOGE before Inauguration Day was cutting something like $119 billion from veterans health care. That's about a third or so, maybe a little more, of the VA's budget. That's specialty care, surgical care, dental, primary care, you name it. That doesn't make sense to me. That is not something our government should be doing. I think people in this country think that for veterans who served, who stepped up, that there's a sacred obligation to care, those benefits are earned, and that we should protect them. But the real answer to your question is, I don't know. But what I know that I will do is stand as strong as I can to defend veterans' care and benefits. These are earned, hard-earned benefits for so many. And if there's any effort to attack them, to really imperil that funding, I'm going to fight it. And I will tell you guys about it, and you'll hear from me, because I find these kinds of attacks and risks unacceptable. I don't know why this is something that even be proposed within this DOGE group, but they did. And I would like to see others, from the president on down, on the other side of the aisle, as they say down in Washington, the Republican side, to also say it's unacceptable to go after veterans' care and benefits. This should not be a partisan fight. But I think folks in Western Pennsylvania know that they expect us to stand strong and to deliver for veterans.
Congressman, our next question comes from Carly from Natrona Heights, and she's asking, what are you doing to make sure women can maintain their rights with the current administration?
Well, I appreciate the question, and as I think all too many know, the Supreme Court took away the federal right to contraception, the federal right to abortion, and I think has put at risk perhaps the right to contraception. And some states have taken action to protect. Some states have taken action to take away further those rights to abortion care, health care, and contraception and others. I think that women, no matter where you are in this country, should have the freedom to make your own decisions around your health care, around your pregnancy. I cannot imagine such a personal decision being one where some politician should take away your freedom, tell you what to do, and threaten prison time for doctors and women. That's crazy to me. I'm on legislation to very clearly restore the rights that used to exist under Roe versus Wade before the Supreme Court took them away. But I will be honest, those bills are not moving with Republican majorities in the House and the Senate. In fact, one of the first bills I had to vote on this Congress was a bill about intimidating doctors who might provide abortion care. Now, thankfully, the Supreme Court has upheld the right to access a drug called mifepristone, which is an abortion pill the FDA has approved for decades. So that right is still there. And I know that in Pennsylvania, folks are working to protect abortion rights for Pennsylvanians, but that's not the case all over the country. And I think that we should be on guard and doing everything we can to pass legislation in Congress to protect that freedom, that core fundamental freedom that you get to make your own decisions around your health care, your pregnancy, not something you want politicians not just interfering in, but dictating terms and threatening prison time. I find it unacceptable.
So scanning through all the questions, and we've got a lot of people with questions, so thank you for everybody who's pressed *3 to enter the question queue and get a question asked this evening. Fran from Forest Hills and Nicole from East Deer are asking about federal workers, Congressman, and what are you going to do to help protect these federal workers?
Well, I'd maybe like to start with who are our federal employees, right? Who are these people? These are people who keep us safe at the airport, TSA agents. These are people who are in law enforcement, FBI agents, prosecutors. These are folks who work to protect and secure our borders and Border Patrol. These are people who are involved in taking care of veterans at the VA. These are people who work to make sure you get your Social Security checks, make sure that Medicare is there. These are public servants. These are working people in Western Pennsylvania, all over the country. These are our service members who wear a uniform, and we might send them into harm's way. And so what has been happening in this administration, I will tell you, there's been an offer, or was a purported offer, to get federal workers to resign early and take a payout. This was challenged in the courts, and I think today was actually just put on hold. And again, this is something, it seems to be coming out of this DOGE, or Department of Government Efficiency, that Mr. Musk and others are involved with. So it seems to be on hold, and certainly some of the unions representing many of our different government workers have been involved in challenging this. But again, I come back to, who are the people who are being attacked here? These are workers who do so much of what we expect our government to do: keep us safe, inspect food, inspect rail safety, go after hardened criminals, international gangs and narcotics outfits, do the hard work to protect this country. That's who we're talking about. I think we got to remember that.
So I'd like to take a quick moment and remind everybody that you are listening in on a live telephone town hall with Congressman Chris Deluzio. And this technology we're using this evening allows us to get instant feedback from everybody on the line with us by way of polling questions. And I've got a question I'd like to ask you now. Please use your telephone keypad to reply. Question is, how are you feeling about the state of costs and the economy today? If you feel better than last year, please press 1. Worse than last year, please press 2. The same as last year, please press 3. So again, we're looking for your input on this question. How are you feeling about the state of costs and the economy today? Press 1 for better than last year. Press 2 for worse than last year. Press 3 for the same as last year. And I see a number of people are keying in their response. So thank you very much for participating in the poll question. And don't forget, tonight during this live event, you can also get enrolled in the Congressman's e-newsletter by simply pressing *6 on your telephone keypad. And here we go, getting back to the questions here, Congressman. Melanie asks, how can we, as a typical non-rich American, fight and make a difference with the madness happening now? And I've got Scott and Barbara who are basically asking the same question, sir.
Yeah, and look, I would say this is our government. It's all of ours. And we all have some obligation to try our best to participate in it, to make it work. There are people on this call who I think probably agree with me. There are people who don't agree with me on every issue. That's American democracy. And what can you or anyone else do? Participate. It might be if you send a letter to me or to our senators or to the president or to some local official who you're happy with or upset with. Maybe you organize your friends and you want to make your voice heard and seen in that way. Maybe you make your voices heard at the polls. Maybe you're making your voice heard right into the newspaper or posting online or what. This is, to me, fundamentally American. And I think our democracy is strong when we are most active in it. When we expect our representatives to stand up for us, to reflect our values, and to hear from us if they're not doing that. And I think in this moment, and as any other, that is what anyone can do and should think about doing if you can. And what I think about my responsibility in this, I represent everyone in this district, about 750,000 people. And I think like too few districts, my district was drawn with a map that's pretty fair, and I've got Democrats and Republicans and everybody in between who I have the honor of representing. That's a beautiful thing. We should push for our democracy to have more fair maps in districts where folks have to listen to all perspectives, where we aren't just funding our elections with huge super PACs and corporate money running through them. I think all of these things tie together. How do you make our democracy better and stronger and encourage folks to want to have some skin in the game and participate? It's also why the corruption I'm worried about, whether it's members of Congress enriching themselves with stock trades or somebody with a big conflict of interest directing so much of what this administration is doing. That corruption undermines our own self-government that I believe very, very deeply in. And it's the oath I take to the Constitution as a member of Congress, the same one that any other service member takes or that I took when I first went in, the 17-year-old. We swear an oath to the Constitution. It's not to any person. It's to a set of ideas into our system of government, and it's one worth defending.
So Fred called in, and he wonders, with all the divisiveness in Washington, is there any issue areas where progress is possible? He's particularly concerned about climate change.
Well, I hope there's some potential for progress on a number of issues, and I don't diminish that it is a very divisive time in Washington, and I think the country, people probably feel that. You might, talk to a neighbor or a friend, and you get in some heated disagreements. I get it. So what are some places of opportunity? Today was getting an update from my team on a bill that I introduced in the last Congress around preventing suicide, veteran suicide, around getting lock boxes to veterans. That was bipartisan last Congress. I'm working to make that bipartisan again. My rail safety work has managed to stay bipartisan. Now, I've also been clear that the Republican leadership in the House has been holding up the bill. I think that should change. I've been calling on Vice President Vance, who was a supporter with me and our senators, Fetterman and then Senator Casey, in the last Congress. I've been calling on Vice President Vance to put some pressure on his allies in the Congress to get rail safety done. I think for those of us in Western Pennsylvania who live pretty close to the tracks, we need action, same as our neighbors in Ohio and others around the country who might be at risk. My bills and efforts on the Armed Services Committee are very much focused not just on making sure we got the military we need to win whatever fight might come. That's part of it, a big part of it. Another part of it is making sure we're not getting ripped off, that we have competition from defense contractors. I've had some efforts there where I've gotten to have some Republicans work with me there. I think we need more of that because, frankly, you talk about protecting public money and making our government more efficient. I keep coming back to this idea. The Pentagon and the defense budget is a huge part of what our government spends on the discretionary side of the budget. That means outside of things like Social Security or Medicare. And I don't want to see public money wasted. I don't want to see our military get things over budget and out of timeline where the quality is no good. I want to see us have a strong industrial base. That all goes hand in hand to me in making sure we have real competition in our economy, real competition on the defense side, certainly, and we have real oversight on the military side of things. So those are some opportunities. It's not a full list because I could go on and on. But I think in a moment, in an environment where our government and where the administration has been taking actions that I think are dangerous, I've talked about, it's going to be harder to find places to work together. But I'll come back to this, and rail safety is a good example. I'm not willing to roll the dice on our safety around party politics. We have to get something done to protect people in places like Western Pennsylvania, and that's going to remain a priority of mine.
Next, we've got Francine from Coriopolis asking, is there anything that can be done to protect Medicaid?
Well, let's start with where the risks might come from, Francine. One of these proposals that we've seen bounced around as my Republican colleagues work through their budget plans and spending plans and tax plans is something in the order of more than $2 trillion of potential cuts to Medicaid funding because they're looking for places to cut spending to pay for fiscally reckless tax handouts to ultra rich people and big corporations. I mean, millions of Pennsylvanians get health care and other help through Medicaid. It helps kids with disabilities get to school. It helps adults maybe remain in their homes as they get older and more. And I see these potential cuts or plans thrown around. And it's all so they can try to pay for big tax giveaways to the richest, most powerful companies and people in America. I think most people in America could use some tax relief. Absolutely. And I think we have historically low taxes for, say, massive corporations who outsource jobs, who don't need more of a tax break. We used to pay a heck of a lot more taxes, even under Republican presidents like Dwight Eisenhower, when we had strong American manufacturing. We had supply chains that weren't stretched all over the planet. We had good, solid union jobs driving so many of those manufacturing jobs. That trickle-down economics stuff, it's never worked. It's never worked for Western Pennsylvania. I think we all know it in our bones. We know it with the data. And these big tax giveaways are fiscally reckless. They balloon the deficit and saddle us with debt to pay for generations to come. And again, on the backs of things like, Francine, your question, cuts to Medicaid, imperiling so many programs that we need our government to do to fund things like local police departments and fire departments and schools, research, infrastructure, that's roads, bridges, rail, airports, you name it. That's what our government ought to be focused on, delivering for people around here in Western Pennsylvania.
Our next question comes from Donna in Sewickley, and she's asking, how will the grant freeze affect municipalities that have already been approved for grants? How will they receive that grant money?
The unfortunate answer is we're still working through it, and here's a reminder for folks of where we stand. So executive orders and guidance from a thing called OMB, it's the Office of Management and Budget, essentially was trying to freeze all federal funding, things like grants, infrastructure projects, and a heck of a lot else. And again, that is everything from local police departments, senior programs, veterans, hiring, a whole lot of things were put at risk. Spare us all a pretty lengthy and ridiculous history showing how amateur some of this was coming from the administration. You had the OMB, that office again. They pulled back that memo. But then you had the White House saying, well, no, the freeze is still happening. Well, a judge stopped this. So for now, this is mostly put on hold, but we're still seeing efforts and a desire by the White House to freeze these federal programs and grants. Things have been approved that the Congress authorized, grants have been awarded that really could put at risk big investments in our region, big investments in our infrastructure. I had a webinar last week when this was all happening, or a little bit after some of this happened, with the Justice Department to help my local police departments and our municipalities and others apply for grants, Justice Department grants they need. And that's just one type of grant that I think could be affected here that could really hurt our communities. And so the short answer is we don't yet know exactly what this will look like, but I know what I will do, which is to fight in every way that I can to make sure that we get the funding we need in Western Pennsylvania, that our tax dollars pay for, that the Congress has authorized. That's what our Constitution expects and demands of any administration.
So our next question comes from Amanda in Chippewa. She's asking, Congressman, what are you doing to combat the threats from the Trump administration?
Well, I hope you've heard some concrete things and real problems I've seen come from this administration in its early days and what I'm trying to do about it. But I guess I start and end with maybe a basic set of values about this job you've sent me to do and what our system of government is. I believe deeply that we can govern ourselves. I believe deeply that I'm sent to do a job for all of us, and that our Constitution puts real power in the Congress and real power in the President and those he puts in his cabinet, for instance. But the Congress has a lot to say about things like spending. Anyone who takes the oath of the Constitution has an obligation to protect our liberty and our rights. And again, I mentioned this earlier. It's the same oath I took, and anyone else who's sworn that oath to our Constitution, I took as a 17-year-old. I believe as deeply then as I do now that this country is worth our efforts, that it's standing up for our freedom, for our rule of law. It's something that is worth sacrifice, that is worth our hard work, that is worth the things that any of you on this call or you might talk to at home would do to protect your son or your daughter, your family, your neighbors, your liberty. That's what I'm going to do. I have a great responsibility in this job. I have some tools at my disposal to make sure that we're protecting all of us. I can push legislation. I can bring public attention to problems and threats. I have an obligation to go on the news and raise alarms where there are problems. I do that. I have an obligation to work with my colleagues to bring pressure on those who aren't with us when we do see problems. I will do that. I will continue to do that. But I come back to my basic belief in all of us, in our government, and my commitment that is as iron as it's ever been to do my duty and to uphold our Constitution.
So I'd like to take a real quick detour and provide the results of the last poll question that we asked, and I want to thank everybody who participated in providing their response to this poll question. The question was, how are you feeling about the state of cost and the economy today? 75% of those that responded feel it's worse than last year. 19% feel it's the same as last year, and 6% feel it's better than last year. So thank you very much for participating in that poll question. We do appreciate your feedback and your input. And now let's get back to another question. This one comes from Nico from Braddock Hills, asking, what can we do to support union labor and the Pennsylvania film tax credit?
Nico, thanks for the question. I'll start with the second part of that around the Pennsylvania film tax credit. That's a state tax credit, so I don't have a say in Washington on it, but I'd urge you to make your voice heard, with your representative and senator who serves in Harrisburg and the governor and others. I think it's an important part of our economy, especially in Western Pennsylvania. We see good, solid jobs, so many union jobs around the film industry. And I know a lot of communities in my district, maybe some of your neighborhoods have seen things get filmed. I can't remember the name of the film I saw recently with a bunch of Ambridge shots in it. I think Man Called Otto with Tom Hanks. Pretty cool. And those are good, solid union jobs, and I think we got to fight for them. And look, the first part of your question, though, what can we do to support union labor? I hope folks know I'm a labor guy. I'm a union guy. I believe deeply in the union way of life and how important the union and labor movement has been to our history in Western Pennsylvania. So many came to our region for the promise of a job, and those were hard jobs, often in the steel industry. And the union and labor movement made those jobs that, again, were tough, jobs with real dignity that could provide a shot at the American dream and the security that I think so many who work hard expect and want. And I back that up with my work in Congress around legislation like the PRO Act that would level the playing field for workers looking to have that freedom to join or form a union without getting intimidated or union busted, as we say, by a boss who doesn't want it. I think management and bosses ought to stay out of it. That's up to workers to decide. Maybe they want a union, maybe they don't, but that's about their freedom. I'm on a heck of a lot of pro-worker bills that are around standing up for workers across industries, not just public sector, not just private sector, industrial or building trades unions. I'm talking across the board. I think workers ought to have a shot to decide if they want to organize their workplace and have a union represent them. And I think about our building trades and how important that training that comes out of those apprenticeship programs really is. Those are really solid training opportunities, which is why we have such a great workforce who can do these big public works, who can do these big projects that we need to drive growth in our region. My district especially, our district, you look at what's going on at the airport, those are solid union jobs driving that construction. You see the construction around roads and bridges, locks and dam on the Ohio River that's going to come. Those are big-time projects that require highly skilled workers, and we got them in Western Pennsylvania. We are poised to have growth, private sector growth alongside that infrastructure growth because we have a great workforce, and our unions are so central to training those folks and giving people a real shot at the American dream and want to work hard. So I believe deeply in it. I hope that comes across, and you see it in the way that I think our government should work, which is standing up for the freedom of workers to decide if they want that union. If they do, that they've got the law on their side.
So next up, we've got Lee from Beaver Falls who says, thank you for your service. He's a fellow veteran. And he wonders, is there anything in the works to bring an airline full-time back to the Pittsburgh airport and make it a hub, like U.S. Airways, I apologize.
Well, I just turned 40, so I don't know if that makes me young enough or old enough. I remember the hub. I remember what it was. And I think the construction you see now, which we should see finish up later this year, it's going to be a very different airport, right? It's going to be a better experience for people who are traveling in Pittsburgh and not just having that connection, which is what the old big hub was made for. That was that train ride. And I think I was pleased to see, the county, which runs the airport, they didn't rely on local property taxes or anything like that. to build this construction. I helped, and my predecessor helped, as did our senators, on some federal money, which is our job. We got to deliver as much federal money as we can for the airport. But I support the airport taking aggressive action to attract flights. I know they've been doing that, and they saw, I think, record passenger traffic post-COVID this past year. Let's build on that. I mean, we know that the airport can be a big economic driver for our region, and I know when businesses are out pitching for investment in our region, looking for talent to come here, the availability of flights is part of it. It connects to a bigger economic development concern for all of us. I want to see business come to Western Pennsylvania. I want to see workers in Western Pennsylvania have options. I want to see small businesses have a chance to start up and make a heck of a lot of money and employ people. And having a good, strong airport is a big part of that. So I'm always going to support that from my perch in the Congress. I sought out and got assignment to the Transportation Infrastructure Committee, which is an important and powerful committee. And I sit on the Aviation Subcommittee, which is part of why I had that briefing earlier on the horrible accident outside the airport here in Washington. But my job down there and my committee assignments, put me in a place to try to deliver for our airport and try to deliver to help support economic development from my side of things on the federal side.
So Congressman, Rita from Industry is asking, why did you vote no on the Laken-Riley Act?
Well, I think we need a tougher and better immigration system. I think, look, to be very clear, people who are in this country illegally, who are convicted of crimes or violent crimes, they shouldn't get to stay in this country. That's why I voted to advance earlier versions of that bill. But I also hope the Senate would have added in protections for law-abiding people who were never convicted of crimes, people like Dreamers who may have been brought to this country as children. The Senate did not do that. House Republicans, and again, I serve in the House, they refused to accept any of those kinds of changes and amendments. I voted no. I'm not willing to say someone who is following the rules, following the law, was brought here as a child, and isn't even convicted of a crime should get sent somewhere else to be deported. That doesn't make sense to me. I'm not going to support that. I will support efforts to restore border security and order at the border and to strengthen public safety. But I don't think the Congress should have sent that bill to the president. That could lead to chaos and really go after people like Dreamers who were never even convicted of crimes, who are following the rules in this country. And I remain ready to work with people in both parties toward the goal of better border security to help our communities and, frankly, bring some sanity to our immigration system. I was in Congress in my first term. There was a deal, a bipartisan deal, that was tough but fair. It had stricter consequences if you tried to cross the border into our country illegally. It had some other requirements added to things like asylum and invested in security. It also had improved process for hearing immigration cases, and yet even that was rejected by Mr. Trump and some of his Republican allies. And I can point to real concrete legislation that I and others support. The Dignity Act, take a look at it. It's a bill that is comprehensive. It goes at border security and border infrastructure. It goes at updating our immigration system to better support American workers and meet the economic needs of this country. It deals with visa problems. And it also deals with finally having a real pathway for folks who want to work hard, play by the rules to earn legal status or citizenship, especially for people like Dreamers to have a shot. I think if you are someone who is here, I don't care if you're from, I say this sometimes, I don't care if you're from Monaca or Mexico. If you are here to work hard, to play by the rules, to follow our laws, you ought to have a shot at the American dream. We ought to have a system that reflects that. And I think about our history in Western Pennsylvania. My family's like so many others. People came to this country looking for jobs and opportunity and freedom. We can never lose sight of that.
So our next question comes from Jim in Sewickley, and asking, do you think it's a good idea to have a congressional daily briefing, not White House, to give a daily trusted source of info without media filtering? Kind of like what Governor Cuomo did during the pandemic.
Well, thanks for the question. Look, I think one of the benefits of the age we live in with social media, and we have cameras on all these phones and all the rest is, for members of Congress, whether you're in leadership or you're a member and wherever you're doing, you can communicate with your constituents directly. You don't have to beg a TV camera to come on or to get on local radio or something. I think it's important. There's a reason I try to communicate every way I can about my work, about what my team is doing for the people who send me to do this job, about what we're up to at home in the district and when I'm in Washington. I think you see these more formal briefings from a lot of the leaders in both parties. I don't know if they're daily, but they happen a lot. And then you see efforts from guys like me to communicate about what we're doing throughout the day, to try to give a rundown every week of what I've been up to when I'm in Washington. And then, of course, there is an important part of talking to the local media, making sure people who are watching the local news or listening to the radio while they're driving or whatever else, also hear about what's happening in Washington and their government. I think it's important. It's part of democracy that we have transparency. And it's part of, frankly, a little bit of the concern I have around what's been going on in parts of the administration where we aren't getting answers. We need to have more sunlight into what's going on in our government, not less.
So next we've got Harry from Ross Township who's asking, what's going on with the tariffs, and will they help or hurt Western Pennsylvania?
Well, thanks for the question. And let me start with, a reminder of how I think about trade. And I think we all know Western Pennsylvania is a place that, we lived through some lousy trade deals and some bad policy that hurt us, that hurt jobs, that hurt American manufacturing, that hurt our industrial leadership. And tariffs are one tool among many around trade, right? We use tariffs for things like countries that break the rules, that don't agree to follow, say, labor rules. Maybe they're relying on horrible sweatshop labor or, worker camps that we've heard allegations of in communist China, for instance. Or maybe they're polluting the environment and not following the rules we would expect them to follow if they were trading fairly with us. So tariffs have a role to play in trade enforcement, the deals that our country negotiates to protect our jobs and keep costs for folks. Now, the president proposed some pretty high tariffs on our neighbors to the north and south, Canada and Mexico. And what really struck me was that the tariffs he proposed on China were weaker than even those on Canada. Communist China has been breaking the rules around trade for a long time. They've been flooding our markets with cheap goods, getting around tariffs in many ways, hurting American workers, hurting American companies, stealing their inventions and intellectual property. And even part of what the president did that I agree with around, it's a thing called de minimis, which basically has allowed for a huge volume of shipments under its $800 to come into this country from China without any tariffs, otherwise would have to pay tariffs, and also without inspections, because they come under a thing called informal entry. And stick with me on this. Well, the president said, okay, China, you've got to, that de minimis loophole, I'm closing it. You got to pay the little tariff on those goods. Okay, I agree with him about that. But you know what he didn't do? He didn't also take on that other part of it and say that those packages and shipments have to be treated like any other kind of imports and be subject to the same kinds of inspections. And guess what? This is how fentanyl and fentanyl precursors and so many materials around fentanyl are coming into our country. They're ravaging too many of our young people and people all over the country. I don't get it. It's a common sense step he could take to better protect us from fentanyl, to stand up to communist China that is doing so much to hurt so many in this country. I hope he will change course. I've been clear that he should. So we shall see. And of course, on the Mexico and Canada side of this, there's been a month while those governments work out something with our president. And the other part of your question was, will it help or it hurt? We'll see. There's a risk that this could really raise costs, that could really hurt parts of our economy. And again, I'm a guy who thinks tariffs are a part of what we do to protect jobs, to protect American manufacturing. But when they're used recklessly, they can also hurt. And I think it's the devil be in the details what we ultimately see come out of this.
Anna from Carnegie asks, what will you do to help preserve the Department of Education? And can Congress help fix it?
I think I missed the name of your question there, Dirk. Can you say it again?
So it's Anna from Carnegie, and she's wondering what we do to help preserve the Department of Education, and can Congress help fix it?
Okay, Anna, I'm going to help you out because I know you're from Carnegie. I appreciate the question. Look, I went back at the beginning of this. I know we've had several questions about some of these efforts that Mr. Musk is leading, going after different programs and departments that our Congress has approved. And back to that rule of law, it's the Congress who decides what programs and government agencies exist and are funded. And again, public education is one of the things people expect our government to do. They expect our government to help fund and shoulder the burden for local taxpayers, for schools, to help provide for kids who might need a little more specialized education, who might have some special needs that our schools have struggled on the local level to fund, that helps young people find a way they otherwise couldn't afford to go get a 2-year or 4-year degree, to go to community college or university. A lot of those are federal programs the Department of Education has a lot to do with. I can be critical. I know that the Department of Education did a lousy job on FAFSA last year, and they heard from guys like me about that. But this idea that we're going to gut funding and the programs that really help our communities, our kids, our teachers, I don't agree with that. I come back to this. I'm happy to look for places for our government to do better and be more efficient. That's not what this is. These efforts are designed to gut so much that we rely on. Also, they can funnel money through tax giveaways to the ultra rich and big corporations. And that trickle-down economics myth, it just has never worked for us.
So it looks like we've got time for just one more question here, Congressman, and it comes from Don, who's asking, why not remove the $176,000 salary cap on Social Security taxes so that millionaires pay their fair share to support the system?
Yeah, one of the things that I think doesn't make a heck of a lot of sense is that someone might make $1 billion and they'll pay the same toward Social Security as someone who makes $180,000. So I agree with you there. I'm on some legislation that addresses that frankly will put Social Security on a stronger fiscal footing. What do I mean by that? That it will be funded for a heck of a long time, to extend out for many, many years, Social Security being there for a generation of workers who are paying in now and might start paying in later because their kids are not even born yet. The promise of Social Security ought to be there, and we have legislation to tackle the exact problem you're asking about, to make sure that folks are paying in as they responsibly should to a program that is earned. These are earned benefits that after a lifetime of hard work and contributing to this country, Social Security will be there for you. That's the promise I have. I'm doing everything I can to protect Social Security.
So this brings us to the end of Congressman Deluzio's live telephone town hall. Thank you, everyone, for participating and joining us this evening. If you have a question that wasn't answered, or if you need assistance from a federal agency, please go to the contact page on the Congressman's website at deluzio.house.gov. You can also call the Congressman's office at 412-344-5583. Again, 412-344-5583. You can continue to stay in touch with the Congressman through social media, the handle @RepDeluzio, or by subscribing to his e-newsletter. And to do that, here at the end of the call, please stay on the line and leave us a message with your name and email address. And now I'll turn it back over again to Congressman Deluzio for some closing remarks and anything else he'd like to add. Congressman?
Thank you. Thanks, everybody, for joining me tonight. My team tells me we had more than 18,000 people come on. That's great. It's been great to hear from so many of you, and I hope you enjoyed hearing a little bit from me. We may not agree on everything. That's okay. But I suspect most of us agree on a lot about what makes us special in Western Pennsylvania. I talk about our values of hard work, patriotism, sacrifice. I know we all care deeply as Americans about our freedom, our liberty. I want to highlight some services that my office and I are there to provide to all of you. First, of course, if you want to stay in the loop, you can sign up for my newsletter. You can see that on my website. It's deluzio.house.gov. You can sign right up. My office hosts paid internship opportunities at home in Western Pennsylvania and then down in Washington. Candidates can apply through the website, and we're looking ahead now to spring and summer interns. We also hold a congressional app and art challenges each year. It's a great chance for high school students to show off artistic skills, app development skills. The deadline for the art competition is coming up this spring, and the winning piece, it's pretty cool, gets displayed for a year in the halls of Congress, and the winning young artist gets to come down to Washington for a ceremony honoring their work. So check it out. More information on my website. We've had great applicants since I've been getting to do this job. And as always, please let me and my team know if we can help you with any issue with a federal agency. Help set you up with a tour if you come visit Washington, requesting a flag flown in honor of a loved one, you name it. My job, our job, is to fight for all of us, the good people of Western Pennsylvania. My office is here to serve everyone. There's a lot of work to get done. Believe me, I know it, and there are big challenges to come. I'm up for it. More than 18,000 of you were on, so I'm sure we didn't answer everyone's questions. But, of course, you can call my office in Washington. That's 202-225-2301. Or my district office, one of them at least, 412-344-5583. We've got offices in Penn Hills, Carnegie, and Center Township. So please let us know what's on your mind. I have pages on my website where you can share your experience with some of the President's recent executive orders. I hope you'll check that out under the Issues tab on my website, deluzio.house.gov. Thank you, everybody, for turning in. Hope to see you soon at home. Good night.